All right, y'all, welcome back to Hustlers at Home. I am so excited to have today's guest, Lori Tharp. She is a journalist, an author, self-proclaimed diversity diva.
Yes.
And I came across Lori's work when I read her book that she co-authored with Ayana Byrd, Hair Story. I really, in the past few months, digging into and educating myself in the BLM conversation, the Black Lives Matter conversation, I really wanted to educate myself on Black history and American history, but specifically Black hair, because for the folks who have followed me over the years, I frequently have braided hairstyles, and those are inspired by and in reverence for Black women and done by Black women. So I think I have a responsibility to hold this conversation. And I'm so happy that you wrote this book, because not only was it informative, it was funny. And there were moments that were really surprising. Of course, there were a lot of things I didn't know. So welcome, Lori. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and your hair looks awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And I want to start the conversation with how, first of all, you used to teach at Temple, right?
I still teach, yes, I do.
Okay,
yes.
I'm from Philly, and my father used to be a law professor at Temple. So awesome. I was appreciating the Philly vibes in your book as well.
Go Owls. Well, yeah, my co-author, Ayana, really brings that, because she was born and raised in Philly, and she's the one that had so much of the Philly connections, and Philly is a hair city. So yes. There was a lot to get from this city. At the time, when I was writing the book, when we were writing the book, we both lived in New York, but we came to Philly for a lot of interviews and research.
Yes. So tell it. So your background. So you met Ayana, both being journalists for magazine publications, and then realized that you were discussing and writing about Black hair, and thought, okay, let's memorialize. Was that the process? Let's put it in it. Let's make it into this Bible.
Yeah, basically that's really what happened. We were both actually working at Vibe magazine at the time, pretty young. I was just out of grad school. Yana was just out of, more or less, we're only a year apart, but yeah, I was just out of grad school. She was just a few years out of undergrad, and our boss was like, did you guys both know you have an interest in hair? Because I had written my master's thesis in grad school about Black hair, and she had written her honors thesis in undergrad about Black hair. And, you're sitting up at like 2 o'clock in the morning, waiting for your pages to pass through for you to edit. And you start talking, and both of our advisors had said to us, you should write a book. And both of us, again, being rather young and new in our careers, had no idea how to write a book, but two heads are better than one. And we were, again, scared, but at the same time, that youthful ignorance, we're like, we could write a book if we did it together. And we did. And the book really was this, appreciation and love of Black hair, but also realization that in the United States, Black hair was just so confounding to so many people. We had both had situations where people had, it was beyond just, can I touch your hair? It was, is your hair clean? Do you wash it? Why does it look like that? Worrying about what it will look like in professional spaces, and even just growing up, going to summer camp and having to explain to your white bunkmates why your mommy had braided your hair for the week and you weren't, washing it like they were, or something like that. Yeah. So we wanted to write this book as almost like a tool for white America to understand Black hair, but also because we knew that most Black people were unaware of the power and history of their hair and what it has meant to Black people since way before European contact. So
let's talk about that, because I think that those chapters were some of my favorite in the book. Specifically, so we're gonna talk. I'll let you unpack that in a moment, but I want to highlight the one. The group of women in Nigeria who are in a polygamous culture, who wear their hair so it can be seen from the back to like shade the other partners. I was like, okay, this is so fierce. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the history and really the glory. I mean, there was such reverence for styling and really the juxtaposition that it wasn't politicized in the way that we are experiencing now. So can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, the word you used, reverence, is the absolute perfect word, because so basically, you know, again, we wanted to kind of show like a history of Black hair from past to present, right? And the relationship that Black people had with their hair. And so we figured we have to start in Africa before European contact to really see what that relationship was. And I mean, again, when we started doing this research back in the late 90s, there really wasn't a book that had this information. So we were astounded to find that, you know, African people use their hairstyles, like you were saying, to say everything about who they were. Like your entire identity was in your hair. So, and that was the same for men or women. So the more status you had in society, the more elaborate your hairstyle would be. We even found a tribe where the men would shave their wives' hair off and braid it to their own to to have more hair, which we were like, that's the first weave, right?
Yes, that's like literally the first weave. Oh my God.
So, but you know, you had a special hairstyle that would show people what tribe you were from, what family you were in. People thought the hair, because it was the highest part of the head, was where the gods might send you messages. So it was also very divine and kind of magical. There were some people who, like the medicine men in Cameroonian societies, would actually attach hair to their medicine bags because it would be thought of something that could protect and was powerful. So you just had to look at somebody and you could know who they were, where they came from, who their people were by their hairstyle. A man wore a certain hairstyle when he was going off to war. A woman would wear a certain hairstyle to signify she was waiting for her man to come back. And hairstyles were so important. Only somebody who was like mentally ill, you know, who had lost their mind, literally, would not have a hairstyle. I mean, there literally was a style for each station in life, each place you might have been in, each emotion you might have been feeling. And so people took such good care of their hair. The styles were done by specific people in the community who were like master hairstylists. And these styles would take so long to create. There were, you know, special tools and things that people would sleep on so they didn't mess up their hairstyles, right? And like, just like today, getting your hair done, which took a long time, was an opportunity to make friendships or to deepen friendships, right? So there was a hair culture, there were tools, there were, again, specific styles. There was a real, like I said, a culture around the hair, and your identity really was wrapped up in your hair. And there was nothing but love for the hair and these unique styles. And it's ironic because we as kind of Westerners or Americans know that the hair was so important. A lot of our knowledge comes from European explorers who would go along with trading and exploring, and would actually write in their journals, these styles are amazing, and this is what they mean. And we've counted 15 different styles that mean 15 different things. Some are really impressive, and the women and the men. So even, to the outside observer, one could see how significant these hairstyles were, which of course then makes it even worse that, this hair was routinely shaved off when slave traders came and, kidnapped and took these African people as slaves. They shaved their hairstyle. They shaved the hair off to just kind of, deem them anonymous, right? And to take away those identity markers. And of course, then, we continue on in history where that loving, reverential relationship turned into one of, confusion maybe at best, and hatred at worst, where we had to untangle, the kind of negative messaging that we have received for generations, that there was something wrong with our hair, instead of remembering, how wonderful and special that relationship used to be with our hair.
Sure. And can you talk a little bit about, it sounds like this good, bad binary conversation of good hair versus bad hair, and what elements are bad, and how that is kind of wrapped up into much larger conversations of anti-Blackness and looking at beauty through a white lens and things. So that, that's clearly something that was a construct or a result of systemic slavery. From enslavers and beauty standards that were imposed on African folks.
You are absolutely right. And I always want to make that so clear that these terms that we, bandy about today, good hair, bad hair, and, those terms are in the Latino community too, pelo bueno, pelo malo, like
Yes.
that was shocking to me when I first started, kind of expanding our research outside of the Black community. I was like, oh, you say that too? Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Definitely.
But it's not surprising because colonization, enslavement, it was all over the Americas, right? So the idea of good hair and bad hair was not like people were walking around a plantation and be like, oh girl, your hair's so pretty, it's so good. It was not like that. It was really because people believed that race was a true, like a biological reality. People actually believed that, if you had white, and I say people, I mean white people, like the scientists and learned people of the day, they really believed that if you had white blood in you, you were more valuable, that you were smarter, that you were more civilized, and it was inherent. It wasn't like something you learned. Therefore, if a Black person showed, visible signs of lighter skin or looser curled hair, then they obviously were more likely to be able to be trained to be kind of, doing more advanced work in the house, for example. You would have slave owners who would say, well, if this slave is, more European-ish, I don't know what the official terminology would be, but they're more European. Well, maybe we can train them to like go do the shopping, do the stores, keep the books, all kinds of things, and likewise, they were obviously treated better. And because many times the reason a slave would have a lighter skin tone or looser curled hair is because they were the result of a rape, right? They were the result of master or master's son, so they did have quote unquote European blood, but it was just assumed that these were better quality Africans, right? And so over time, it became very clear to anybody in this awful system, well, gee, the people who look more like master get better treatment, and it's not worth discussing whether it was nice to be a house slave versus a field slave. There's so many, pluses. There's no pluses. There's just so many things that you could say good, bad. But come on, the idea that you could be sleeping indoors, that you had access to potential education, access to the quote unquote white man's ways, and even perhaps not affection, but getting a relationship with that master who therefore might lead to freedom. Because a lot of times a master might say, on my death, I will free, these slaves that I am, connected with, something like that. So from a very, very, very early on in this, antebellum era, African people recognized the more I look like the master, the better I will be treated. And it was truly like, because white slave owners would say things like, you are subhuman. We treat you like animals because you are pretty much like an animal. Your hair is closer to wool, to animal fur, than it is to human hair. Your skin, your physical features, all of that shows that you are not human like we are. So again, what do you do to try to get people to stop beating you, to stop stealing your children away, to stop raping you? You do what you can to be seen as human. And if that means, putting grease in your hair so that it looks looser, so that you can manipulate it so it looks like white person's hair, you will do that. And that is what, Black people started to do, because they realized, hey, if that's the ticket to not be treated as an animal, I'll do what I have to do. And that concept, it just gets turned over and turned over and turned over until we don't necessarily, we're no longer living under enslavement, but there's still that idea of like, well, if I want to be treated like a decent person, then I guess I have to play the game. And if making my hair straight and, conform to a European aesthetic, I guess I'll be treated better. And that's where we have this continuous like keening for and yearning for hair that looks like a white person's hair. It didn't start as a beauty ideal. It literally started as a survival technique. But again, over generations, we've, it's all gotten mixed up with culture and beauty and societal expectations and respectability politics and all of that. But that's where it started from. And that's, again, why we wrote Hair Story, because we wanted people to understand, you got to go way, way back and understand it's all a lie. It was all based on a system of oppression to keep people believing that they were less than, so they were less likely to rebel. And that's really where it comes from. And so if you go even further back and say, hey, we started loving our hair, let's get back to that place. That's why we wrote the book. And that's what we hope people, get out of it.
I mean, the journey, I think the historical power of unpacking that, untangling that, as you would say, is incredibly important, because you're taking back the narrative. And I think these conversations are so critical, because it's not just about, illuminating and supporting Black culture, but this is American history. And I think we're having really constructive conversations finally about privilege and recognizing privilege. And there is a semblance of awareness of beauty standards, but I don't think folks realize, non-Black folks realize the privilege of not having to grow up, having these conversations, or even having the microaggressions, or sound like straight up aggressions that you described, happen on a regular basis, simply because people are just enraptured in their own misunderstanding, or ignorance, or maybe worse. But what would you say to a white person or a non-Black person who's just hearing this conversation for the first time? I mean, you mentioned some microaggressions, and we know not to touch any Black woman's hair, but like, what are some real takeaways? Because I want folks to be able to not only unearth the history, but also have be armed with a greater sensitivity, greater appreciation, and certainly greater respect.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not being facetious here, but really read my book, read Hair Story, because it's not where you can't just say, oh, I know hair is important to your people, to the Blacks, like, we don't want that to be the takeaway. It is complicated. You do have to untangle it. There's a lot of things that are involved in where we are today with why certain hairstyles, because again, not every hairstyle started in Africa that people have problems with today. We know the Afro, we know dreadlocks, which were more kind of political, dreadlocks were not political, but the Afro was like a political statement. Dreadlocks came from a different culture in the Caribbean, but they each have significant meanings and backstories that, again, you got to kind of know, you have to know it all. Yes. And it's an easy read, but it's educating yourself. It's educating yourself. And again, I feel like people will take the time to educate themselves about the stock market, about how to talk to their kids about sex. They'll educate them, about wine, right? I really want to be a connoisseur about wine, and they'll read and they'll take classes. You just have to read a book, right? Or, watch a couple of really good documentaries, but you just have to understand. And again, I don't think it's too much to ask for people to take the time to read a book, right? It's an audio book now. You can listen to the book in your, I would say car, but people aren't driving as much anymore, but whatever, just listen to the book, because it's just, again, it's educating yourself and having enough empathy to say, that's not my experience. Like, I don't have that hair story, no pun intended, but I can respect you enough to say that your story is worth understanding on a deeper level. And hey, I may enjoy this story. Like, it may enlighten me in ways that I never thought possible. If you can think about this with hair, then you can think about, certain like food cultures or food traditions in other cultures, or any other kind of cultural tradition that's different from your own. Hair for Black people is that. It's part of our culture. It really says something about who we are. And it is different. You can't be like, I'm colorblind, like, oh, your hair is important. It's totally different. Just the way we have to take care of it, the products we use, it's all different. And so I think the takeaway is really just to educate yourself. And now, again, like, our book, Hair Story, I think is the most comprehensive and easy book to like get it all the information you need. But like I said, there's documentaries, there are, like series, like Netflix series, there's all kinds of things that you can do to inform yourself and, just being a better human, just being a better person who understands a little bit more And I guarantee you that hair education will lead you to understand a little bit more about like colorism, for example, and colonization throughout the, you know, South Central Latin America, and even in Asia and Southeast Asia. Like you'll start connecting the dots. Personally, I can connect almost every racial issue back to hair. Like I can bring you a hair metaphor into almost anything. And it's true. So like, it's not going to be a waste of your time. It's not going to be like wow, I read this really esoteric topic, you know, like hair. It's really going to show up in all the things, which is what
it's no less nuanced than a Spanish Rioja or something.
But I'm saying, I still don't understand. I was like, wait, what? The wine can taste like cherries? What? And there were no cherries in the wine? How'd you do it? You know, so it's a fascinating story. I mean, it really is. It's connected to all things: politics, history, music. You know, you'll be surprised at where hair, you know, black hair particularly, you know, has its roots or tentacles in different parts of our culture. And again, that's the only takeaway. It's just educate yourself. And I guarantee you, it's a fun education.
It was for me, for sure. So where is the conversation now? So Gabrielle Union just posted the other day. She was on the cover of, I think, a fitness magazine, and it was the first time she'd ever been shot for a cover with her natural curls. So, I mean, and of course, that kind of representation is amazing, but it's still a very nuanced and layered conversation. You updated the book with your co-author in 2014 when it was almost a decade, more than a decade after it was originally published. So that it's a good sign that it seems to show progress. But where, from your point of view, where's the conversation now, especially as it relates to anti-Blackness and folks in the Black community?
Yeah. So such a good question, because of course everybody wants to know, are things getting better? I mean, this book came out originally in 2001, so we're coming up on 20 years, right? And it would be ridiculous for me to say that progress hasn't been made, because progress has been made. When this book first came out, there was no natural hair movement. Black women who wanted to wear their hair natural, you know, had to like move mountains to find products or to find somebody who could style their natural hair, or who wouldn't try to talk them out of it and tell them to keep straightening. So, and we've seen a decline in Black women wearing their hair with straightened with chemical relaxers, which more and more studies are now coming out definitively proving that, you know, some of these chemicals are actually cancer causing, definitely have other connections with other like chronic disease. So the natural hair movement, I believe, is a very positive trend that we're seeing. We're also seeing more women in more like professional areas able to wear natural hairstyles without negative repercussions. We're seeing little girls love their hair. We're seeing more books, like picture things portraying girls and boys with, you know, exuberant natural hairstyles. We saw Hair Love win the Oscar for short film. So there's definitely a critical kind of mass where people are recognizing and appreciating Black hair in all of its manifestations, right? So on that hand, like, we're good. We're doing so well. I'm so happy. I just showed my daughter a little short film about a woman who decided to cut off her relaxed hair. And my daughter, who's 9, was like, "What's a relaxer?" I was like, that's progress. My 9-year-old had no idea what a relaxer was, because I've been natural since she was born, since way before she was born, but still. So that's progress. However, you know, you only have to turn on the news to see, you know, I think it's been 2 years now, but when that young wrestler, you know, got his dreadlocks hacked off in the middle of a wrestling match, we still see women being fired, women and men being fired from their jobs or not hired because of hairstyles. We still see, you know, it was not even, I think it was the end of last year. No, this year, May of 2020, young men not able to walk in their graduations because of wearing dreadlocks. I mean, it seems like I am on the radio, I feel like, every other day, because there's yet another case that somebody wants to unload and unpack. Why are we still, you know, why can't this child go to school? Why can't this child go to the prom? Why can't this woman keep her on-air job? Why is Beyonce still the beauty standard when she's wearing a weave most of the time with blonde, you know, long, straight blonde hair? So we have come a long way. There is representation of Black women with natural hairstyles. Black men can be more creative and allow their hair to grow above that half an inch on their head. But we are still battling, you know, and I feel like the battle is going to be there when we still have people feeling like the danger of, well, is this what's going to be the new normal? I'm not ready for that. So we do still have, you know, situations where people are, you know, fighting against Black people wearing their hair the way they want to. Another benefit, though, is that we now have the Crown Act, which is a new law that is now being adopted state by state. We're hoping that it'll be eventually a federal law, but it is a law that specifically says that you cannot discriminate in schools and workplaces against natural hairstyles. And again, it's only been adopted in a few states, a handful of states at this point. But the fact that it exists now and more states are trying to adopt it officially, it gives people if nothing else, it gives them the idea that they have the law on their side. So if they are discriminated against, either, you know, being fired or not being hired or being removed from school, that they have the law to say, like, you can't do this to me anymore. I actually have something to stand on. So this is, to me, this is progress. We still have a lot of work to do. And I want to be 100% clear. It is not only white Americans who are, let's say, standing in the way of Black people being their full free selves with their hair. There are many Black people themselves who are still, like I say, brainwashed with the, you know, the idea that there is something wrong with our hair being worn in traditional or natural styles. So again, it's all about educating ourselves, Black people, white people, Latino people, Asian people. Everybody who lives in proximity of some Black hair needs to educate themselves. But I would say we're doing much better. And like I said, you only have to ask a child, you know, what do they think about their hair and the language they use. And I think you will hear a lot of positive voices in that realm. And that makes me happy.
Yeah, it's happy and hopeful. And by the way, for folks watching, the Crown, you can sign a petition in support of the Crown Act, and I would check out whether it's been adopted in your state, because I was able to sign an online petition in support, and that kind of, I mean, who knows? The legislators pay attention to numbers, and they pay attention to where they think our voices are going to go. So this is the kind of thing that it's very simple. It's a click of a button, but you can actually make some change. We have flown through our time, but I want to end and ask you about your podcast, My American Melting Pot. So let's talk about your podcast and what it's about and how people can tune in.
Thank you, because such perfect timing. I'm not sure exactly when this episode will air, but I'm about to launch season 5 of my podcast, which is called My American Melting Pot. And I say it's a podcast for people living multicultural lives, which simply means, you know, for people like me, I'm a Black woman, I'm married to a Spanish man, I'm raising 3 bilingual, biracial, bicultural children. And my life has always been this like mix of cultures and languages and accents and hair types and hair textures and skin tones. And I've always lived like that. And I just never understood people who lived in these like little segregated bubbles. So my podcast is an exploration of race and culture in America and how it just intersects with everything from, you know, the food we eat to the music we listen to. But this season that I'm about to launch on September 18th, I'm actually doing like a little special season called Don't Be Racist, where it's going to be like 5 to 7 minute digestible lessons of how to work on your anti-racism. So it'll be do this, don't do that, kind of suggestions for people to continue with this anti-racism work that I'm desperate, that I'm just really hopeful that people don't stop. You know, there's a lot of momentum. People want to do something different. They want to do more, but they don't really know what to do. So with on My American Melting Pot, up through the end of the year, starting September 18th, every Friday, there'll be a new like 5-minute lesson that can take you, you know, to the next place on your learning and your journey of anti-racism work. So I hope people will find 5 minutes on their Fridays to tune in, get a great lesson, get some great ideas, and like take it to the streets.
Yes, I love this. It's a call to action, but it's also the takeaway. And come on, if you don't have 5 minutes to devote to
Right?
diversity and anti-racism conversations, you need to stop scrolling Instagram.
Right? That's what I say.
So your book is Hair Story. The podcast is My American Melting Pot. And where can folks find you on social?
They can find me on Instagram at Lori. I just changed my Instagram handle. It's at Lori L. Tharps. I forgot about my
IG, and the IG for the podcast is My American Melting Pot.
That's what it is.
Amazing. Well, listen, I am so grateful that you took the time and truly, sharing this kind of education and the honest plug of like, the answer is educate yourself. If you would educate yourself about a red wine, we should be doing our diligence for such a critical part of culture in American history. Well, I am grateful that you are on Hustlers at Home, imparting some of that knowledge, and we will continue to do the work. And I'm very, very grateful we had a chance to chat today.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thank you so much for being here. Be well. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.